The computer system Post Office spent an arm and a leg on is faulty.
No one else has ever reported any problems with Horizon. No one.
You're responsible for the loss.
I haven't got that money, and I don't know where it's gone.
These deficits were most likely caused by you. That is the Post Office case.
All our hopes, all our savings down the pan.
That was a lie, actually. We are fighting a war against an enemy owned by the British government, while we're just skint little people.
Brilliant. The brilliant Toby Jones playing the former Llandudno sub-postmaster Alan Bates there at the centre of the four-part drama which concluded last night. You can still watch it on catch-up on ITVX. It tells the true story of the biggest miscarriage of justice in British legal history, which saw hundreds of sub-postmasters falsely accused of theft, fraud and false accounting. Due to a faulty IT system, many of the wronged workers were prosecuted, some went to prison, some were even driven to suicide. And as I say, it was Alan Bates, the Llandudno sub-postmaster, who played a crucial role in bringing the scandal to light. Mr Bates and 5 others from Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance took the Post Office to court on behalf of 555 claimants. And so many people have taken to social media to share their anger, including us, noticing in the newspapers this morning, some of the cast of the drama who felt so angry at the end of it, as they were unaware as they were of the depth of this story. So I wonder how you felt watching it. Many of you have called in already and are texting in your messages. So please continue to do that. And we'll go to the lines before too long. But first of all, I want to speak to Tim Brentnall from Roach in Pembrokeshire, who was prosecuted in 2010 after a £22,000 shortfall was discovered at his branch. His wrongful conviction was eventually quashed in 2021. He's one of the 555. Tim, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How have you felt over the past few nights watching? How did you approach this? Did you binge the lot in one go? I suppose it'd be difficult not to.
Yeah, I did plan to watch it sort of nightly, and after watching the first one on Monday night, we binged all the way through it and the accompanying documentary as well.
And how did it make you feel?
It was a whole range of emotions watching the drama, from despair, upset, vindication, anger, probably every emotion that you can feel we went through.
And did they do a good job of telling it as it was? Well, as it is, really, because it's not over.
No, it's not over. And Gwyneth did a fantastic job with the drama of condensing the last 20 years into those 4 hours, factually, but also emotionally as well, getting across all the different feelings and how it's affected all of us personally.
Because you will all have things in common, but also you all have your own story. So I suppose that there's a job in there to try to tell everyone's story through the stories of only some of you. Was there a particular character that you thought, actually, well, yeah, that's my story?
Yeah, very much so. I knew beforehand already that my story mirrored very closely the story of Joe Hamilton, where, problems occurred in the branch. You were then audited, and a shortfall was found. I then had to, or I was told basically, to pay that money back, or I'd face a theft charge for it. So raided my savings, my parents' savings, the business account. Had to sell my car at the time. Because we thought I was trying to save my job, basically. But as soon as the money was paid back and the theft charge threat was dropped, they then prosecuted me for false accounting.
Right, because for people who need a bit of a catch-up here, I think what happened, basically, in a nutshell, is that post offices had been run a certain way, ledger books, pen and ink, balance the books at the end of the day for decades, for centuries. As indeed, I think it was your parents who were doing it in the branch that you then took over from them. Then the computer system was brought in to do all of that work for you. And for you and for others, when you were balancing up at the end of the day, occasionally, I don't know how many times it happened to you, occasionally there would be a shortfall, wouldn't there? The till wouldn't add up. And in order to open the following day, you had to make sure it did add up. So I think many postmasters were left with the option to, put the money in themselves, make it all add up, and try to get hold of somebody to sort it out. Is that how it worked for you?
Yeah, basically. I mean, even when I was trained to use the Horizon system, we were told that you'll never balance to zero, which looking back with hindsight seems ridiculous. But when it's sort of a couple of pence or a couple of pounds either, I don't really worry about it. But suddenly, at the end of a balancing period, when it says you've got a £2,000 loss, you suddenly have to worry about it because you're responsible for putting that in. And you know, when you can afford to, I assume all postmasters just did until it was unaffordable. And then you'd ring the helpline, and as it was shown in the drama with Joe, sometimes the advice they'd give you would increase the loss that we're showing. And you had to balance or put that money in to be able to open and trade the next day. So at some point, we were all left with the option of having to press that button to say the money balances when it didn't, which is where they charged us with false accounting.
And I think one of the greatest scandals of it, and I spoke to Joe Hamilton a few years ago when I was making a programme here about this. I spoke to Alan Bates, I spoke to Noel from Gwalchmai as well, who's one of the leading figures in it, all of whom made the point, and we heard it in the clip there from the programme at the beginning, and I was pleased that this was reflected, was that this was happening all over the country. And there were dozens, hundreds of postmasters phoning the helpline. But it seems that when every one of you phoned the helpline, you were told no one else is having any problems.
Yes, I mean, even as far as when I was interviewed by the Post Office investigators, sort of, I don't really understand what's happened, but I know I haven't been dishonest. At the time, going back to 2009, 2010, I didn't suspect that there was a system problem, but I sort of maintained that I didn't know what had happened, and even the investigators told me that I was the only person having problems. And I mean, at that time, they were prosecuting about one person a week. So, you know, through the whole organisation, they repeated that lie.
Yeah. So when you were audited in 2009, then that brought the prosecution. You were convicted in 2010. Even that, even in that, it seems. Well, you tell me about how you came to be convicted. You ended up, didn't you, pleading guilty, even though you knew you hadn't done anything?
Yeah, initially I maintained that I wanted to plead not guilty, but when it was taken to Crown Court, and you obviously have a barrister, the barrister sat me down and explained that it was me versus the Post Office, which was the Crown. It would be the Queen versus me in court. And how can you convince a jury that what you're saying versus what the Queen or the Post Office is saying is correct? And they sort of very sternly said, look, if you insist on pleading not guilty to this, the likelihood is you'll be found guilty, and you'll have a custodial sentence. Whereas if you plead guilty, you get the credits for that, and they could probably keep me out of prison, which is not unique to me at all. There's many of us that were prosecuted that decided to take that route because the fear of prison was terrifying. Unfortunately, then when you tried to maintain your innocence sort of locally or with some friends or family afterwards, people would turn around and say, well, you've pled guilty. You know, it's that old cliche of there's no smoke without fire, etc. And people can't understand why you would plead guilty to something that you haven't done. But it was purely based on the plan of trying to avoid that prison sentence. Yeah,
and and in many communities, and I'm sure in yours too, the postmaster is a figure of some standing in a community, because you have great responsibility. You have to go through rigorous checks to become one. And I remember Noel Thomas telling me this in Gwalchmai, how one of the hardest things, I mean, he went to prison, but he said one of the hardest things was the knowledge that people were chattering behind your back, the way that they'd look at you as a result of all of this. Do you have to deal with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's crazy. We had to sort of the selection process for becoming a postmaster was so rigorous. You had to prove you had no sort of criminal background or even past financial troubles or anything like that. And it was a real position of trust and respect in the community. Very much the same as Noel, where a rural West Wales community here, people came to the post office not just for the services, but for a chat and advice, and it was a real community hub for the village, and all that was then immediately ripped away, and people couldn't understand, and many people still don't understand that there was no money that was actually. It was a mistake. The losses that they were putting to us didn't ever. That money didn't ever exist. It's all sort of a phantom transactions and things like that. But people really saw it as though we had our hands in the till, or even worse, sort of were pilfering old people's pensions and things like that.
Yeah. So what are they? How did you find Alan Bates, or how did Alan Bates find you? Because Alan was the man who wouldn't take this lying down, wasn't he? Initially, an incredible personality, and the energy it must have taken to get this off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few sort of heroes of this piece, and Alan's very much one of them. I first heard about, following my conviction, and I had to do community service and had a suspended sentence. It was maybe 18 months later that it was a little sidebar in a retail magazine. Said that there's a group of sub-postmasters who feel they may have been wronged by the post office, and if you feel you're one of them, it gave Alan's number. So I rang it, because I thought, well, that fits what's happened to me, and spoke to Alan. The article said I think there was about 17 people. When I spoke to Alan, I think I was the 47th person to call him following that article. And when I got to the first JFSA meeting in Bicester, in the little village hall portrayed there in the documentary, or the drama rather, there was 50 of us. And the next time there was 100 of us. And then that's when you start to think, well, there might be something in this, because at that time, 2009, it was really pre-social media, and being told you're the only person that had these problems almost leads you to start to blame yourself, to think, well, even if I haven't been dishonest, it must have been a mistake that I've made, or something along those lines.
Well, especially if you're being told all along that you're the only one who's had this issue, and then suddenly you're in this room. Crikey, there are hundreds of us. And so it went to court, you won the case, the conviction was quashed, and where does that leave you now?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a roller coaster, because, firstly, there was the second site investigation back in 2012 that started, who again, Ron and Ian from Second Sight are other heroes in the scandal. Basically the most honest, upstanding people that you could meet, who wouldn't take the deception from the post office, and really started to get to the bottom of what had gone on. And then nothing happens for 5 years after that. We win the court case, which was put across so well. We won. The judge agreed with us, and there hasn't been a judgment like that before or since against someone like the post office. But many of us ended up with even less than we'd had to pay back to avoid theft charges. So you kind of think, well, how can that actually be a win? And then another hero, Neil Hudgell, took on our cases as people with convictions, and got those convictions quashed through the Court of Appeal. And that was 2.5 years ago. And again, you think, well, now things are going to start to be put right. But none of us so far have had, as Alan puts it, the redress that we're entitled to. We're now sort of stuck in this almost purgatory where we're due, the money that we paid the post office and what the government like to call compensation coming to us. But we're still locked in a fight to sort of justify every bit of that, and no one's had any kind of proper sorting out of it yet. And
in the meantime, you've lost your business, so you've lost the means to earn anything. I think you've had family circumstances as well on top of all of this, which have made life even more difficult, Tim. I mean, what's left?
Yeah, so before 2010, I'd built the retail business into a thriving little village store. We were turning over, £250,000-300,000 a year. When the post office was taken away, that fell through the floor. So, I bought the village shop with my parents, or taking it on from them, with the view to being able to stay in Pembrokeshire and work and live here, because I found to find any kind of job that was worth doing, I was getting taken further and further away from home. So it's ruined, plans that this was supposed.
I think we may have lost Tim at this point.
Then,
oh, sorry, Tim.
think-
We lost you momentarily there. Sorry, you are back. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it took away the business. It totally destroyed the plans for the future, what was supposed to be my inheritance. Then, unfortunately, my partner, as you said, she's had health problems, thyroid cancer and stuff, so I care for her now. But, all of us are waiting for this sort of promised redress that we're going to get, but it just seems to be delay after delay. And I know the Minister for Postal Affairs offered everyone with an overturned conviction this £600,000 payment, which to me and to anybody sounds like an awful lot of money. But when you think of people like Noel or Joe Hamilton or Seaman, people who've been to prison, people like Martin in the story who took his own life, how does that kind of figure come anywhere near to compensating people? I mean, many people have been through even worse stories than I have, and it's almost an insult.
Well, if part of the battle was to tell your story and for people to know and to understand, then I think the series has been a terrific success. And certainly, judging by the comments that we've been receiving here, Tim, while you've been telling your story, just a couple of them, Jules in Bridgend has texted to say, "Well, this is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in UK history. People in charge knew there was a problem. We need £2 million compensation per victim, and it's appalling," says Jules. And this from Tanya. Also in Bridgend, "I'm quite appalled as to what I've witnessed in the drama. In the post office, there were human beings, and I can't quite believe that as an organisation of humans, they could do such harm to other human beings, causing tremendous distress. I'm really quite upset by what I've learned." I think many people feel that way, Tim. Thank you so much for coming on to tell us your story, Tim. We wish you well for the future. We'll continue to follow your story. 8 10 12 to text, 03700 100 110 to call. Your reaction to Tim's story there and Alan Bates versus